Hello, Midofpa. Today I bring you my also delicious cottage pie made to suit the African taste buds. So in my pot I've got my fluffy potatoes. I used Maris Piper, but any one that's fluffy you can use, like King Edward you can use. So I got it on my hob and started to boil it. Now I proceeded with my cottage pie sauce. So I'm using beef, British beef, and I think it's full fat British beef. I chose to use that because I don't really need to add any oil to it. So if you choose to use a lean fat beef, then you have to add some oil. So as you can see, there's no oil in my pan at all. And I added in some spices, my 10 spice blend and 7 spice blend with some salt to season it, and got it to cook. So stir it and leave it for it to cook thoroughly till there are no pink bits. So the other ingredients that are going to go into my sauce is my chorizo, onions, diced onions, and some pepper. And the herbs, I've got a mixture of sage, rosemary, and thyme, and some grated garlic, some dried shrimps, which I got from the Asian shops, and some tomato. I'm using tomato plum tomatoes, and these are dried onions that I got from my Asian shops that will go on top of my potatoes when it's going to bake. And of course I'm going to add in some cheese on just on the top, okay, to make it nice and yummy. So yes, I got my boy to grate the cheese for me whilst I got on with other stuff. So my meat is almost done. It's almost cooked through, and I'm now adding in my chorizo and my diced onions and the pepper. The pepper is to suit to your taste. So just a hint of pepper is all you need, because traditionally cottage pie there's no pepper. So this is my African twist to the traditional cottage pie. So I proceeded to add in my grated garlic and stir and just let it cook until the onions become translucent. So at this point I was checking on my potatoes, it's coming up to the boil and it's good. So once the onions became translucent, I added in my plum tomatoes and rinsed out my tin, added the water, no wastage here. This is an African girl cooking. So yes, just stir it, and then at this point just allow it to simmer gently on a low heat. So one thing that I added that I think I didn't capture in this video is some Worcestershire sauce. So that was added in at this point. And then I also added in, this is my homemade stock cubes. This is a vegetable stock cubes with some shrimps actually. So I made it with basically leftover vegetables that were hanging out in my fridge. I boiled it up, added my and herbs as well. I had some herbs, so that was added, and I froze it, blended everything and froze it. And here I am with my vegetable stock cubes that I use now and then when I need a stock to make up for my sauces. So with the cottage pie, at this point you need to have a bit of liquid because it's going to go into the oven to cook further. So you want a bit of liquid in there so that it doesn't go too dry. So I added in the stock cubes with some water to make that stock. If you have liquid stock, go ahead and use that. So I covered it for it to simmer gently and cook nicely. As you noticed, I didn't add any extra salt because in the beginning I seasoned the meat really well. So now onto my mashed potatoes. I seasoned it with some nutmeg, and usually I would add in some crushed black peppers, but I didn't have any at this time, so that didn't go in there. It was nutmeg and some butter. Butter was added in there to make it nice and sweet and tasty and flavorful. I'm not a mash girl, and, and mashed potatoes girl, but if it is done really really well, I will eat it. You can actually use your food processor to make your mash. You tend to have a very very smooth mash, which I don't prefer, so I rather use my hand masher to mash it up. So once the potatoes are mashed quite well, I added in some milk. This is to make it nice and creamy and fluffy, you know, just lovely. So just add enough milk to achieve the consistency that you like or prefer. So I added quite a bit to get that smooth, creamy, not too soft, but half and half, not too stiff too, mashed potatoes. So if you noticed, I was tasting the potatoes, the mash. Okay, I'm not that type to do that, but this was so tasty, and I knew my cottage pie was going to be so good. So I tend to use a casserole dish or a baking tray, but in this instance I prefer my choice was for this casserole dish with a cover, because any leftovers I can easily just cover it up and put it in the fridge. Hey, this girl doesn't like cleaning. So you can see I didn't use any oil to cook my sauce, but as you can see I was skimming off some oil, so you can imagine. And I would advise you to do this. If you have excess oil in your sauce, do skim it off, because once you bake the cottage pie, you get the oil just rising up, and when it is too soaked in your cottage pie, it is not good. So do skim off excess oil, and you know what, that excess oil can be for your stew another time. And so here I just proceeded to topping up my sauce with the mash. I intentionally reserved some of my mincemeat sauce because that will be our lunch for the next day for the kids. Now that we are home, it's my go-to for their prepped lunch. So that is going to be for spaghetti bolognese, and I know that's going to be so delicious as well. So yes, I just reserved some for the next day. Good mama, eh? So here I'm just basically trying to make my cottage pie look all so nice by leveling it off and using a fork to create some designs on it. So the design is all up to you. You can get carried away. So I did my lovely designs, and then I topped it up with my grated cheese. I used matured cheddar cheese. That's my preference. I love that cheese, matured cheddar cheese. I think you can use any cheese of your choice, but this is my preference. And then I topped it up with these fried onions to give that crunch. You can use as much or as little as you want. So I, added enough to give that crunch on the topping and put it in my oven. So my oven had been preheated to about 180 degrees Celsius, and I just, when everything was ready, I just put it in the oven to bake for about 40 minutes. And look at me, I just had to do that, clean my stew pot with a bit of the mash. So I served my cottage pie with some boiled or steamed veggies. That's what I had in my fridge. The whole meal came together so beautifully and it was so tasty. I hope you do give it a try, and As always, I'll love to hear from you, and do have a wonderful time. Don't forget to subscribe. Till next time. Bye.